Thank you so much. I feel you may have just set me up. Those going, oh, wouldn't it be great to have Bishop David as our bishop? And I think David did an amazing job of proving how fantastic a bishop can be. I want to bring a reality check. My wife and I, a few weeks ago, were speaking at Church Weekend Away. And it's the most beautiful and wonderful thing to work with your wife, and also the toughest thing. And she would probably say the same even more strongly in reverse, because we are so different. And she's a nightmare to work with because 6 months before we're going somewhere, she is planning the talks. Whereas for me, it's 6 days before we're going somewhere. What it means is she has decided we're going to do her favorite topic, and I've got nothing to argue back against that because I have nothing to offer. She wants me to decide what 2 sessions am I going to speak on, and I go, without really thinking about it much because it's 6 months away, oh, well, I could talk about that. Great, I'll talk about this. And then I come to prepare it and realize how woefully I made my choices. And if I'm really honest, this isn't going to help. Do you ever have this thing where you know what a passage says and it makes the point you want, so you choose it, and then you realize the passage doesn't actually say what you wanted it to say in the way you wanted it to say it? And then there's the conflict, I don't know why I'm telling you this, because none of you would do this, of going, do I preach the passage or preach the message I had that the passage could have helped with but isn't? I wanted to talk on this Church Weekend Away, which was all about Moses, in one of the sessions, in the last session, about the end of Moses' ministry. The moment where he has a lot more ministry afterwards, but the moment where he doesn't get to go in the promised land. Because in my memory, what happens is the fact that God says the people are, as always, grumbling, moaning, and saying we're thirsty. And God says to Moses, speak to the rock, and water will come out of it. And Moses, in his frustration, which is so understandable, with the people not listening, not engaging, moaning, and this is the second generation of them, Moses strikes the rock twice. And then I turn to the passage. Numbers 20. In the first month, the whole Israelite community arrived at the desert of Zin, and they stayed at Kadesh. There Miriam died and was buried. Now there was no water for the community, and the people gathered in opposition to Moses and Aaron. They quarreled with Moses and said, if only we'd died when our brothers fell dead before the Lord. Why did you bring the Lord's community into this wilderness, that we and all our livestock should die here? Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to this terrible place? It has no grain or figs, grapevines or pomegranates. What a terrible place. And there is no water to drink. And then in my memory, we have the bit about the rock, but I'd forgotten this bit if I'd ever read it. Moses and Aaron went from the assembly to the entrance to the tent of meeting and fell face down, and the glory of the Lord appeared to them. And then the Lord said to Moses. And that shocked me. What's going on there? Because I wanted to preach on the fact that Moses has become bitter and twisted and jaded, and he's stopped coming to God, and he's caught up in his own stuff. I'd also missed the fact that it says in that passage that Miriam had just died. And isn't that interesting that Moses is in his own personal grief and pain? He's struggling, whether consciously or subconsciously, with distress. And whether when the people are moaning, he's like, look, I've got my own stuff to deal with. But how does Moses respond? He falls face down and he worships and he prays, and the glory of God comes. And as I first read it, that caused me a problem because that sits in complete contrast to later he gets it wrong. But I wonder whether that's a salient word for us. I don't remember the last time I fell face down before God. I don't remember the last time I was so deeply, profoundly in prayer that I fell on my face saying, God, we need you. I probably had a meeting to discuss the strategy for what we'd do. I don't remember the last time that I was in a meeting where I was so aware of the glory of God upon us. One of my prayers throughout 30 years of ministry has been, I would love to be in a service one day where we can't carry on as at the dedication of the temple because the presence of God is so profound. Moses has that in some measure that day, and yet he still gets it wrong because his heart is not in the right place. And that challenges me. Because I can lead, I can preach, I can worship, I can pray, but is my heart in the right place? This is the Moses who at a point where God said, look, Moses, I'm not going with these people anymore. I'm just going to take you. We'll leave them behind, which every church leader in their honest heart at times would go, yes, God, that would be brilliant. But Moses goes, no. He intercedes and says, no, you can't go without them. But at this point, Moses is setting himself against them. Moses isn't carrying the people on his heart. He's angry, even if it's only subconscious. And I wonder whether there's a challenge that have we lost our heart? Have we crying out? Are we falling face down? My wife, in the weekend, talked about her favorite verse. It's in Numbers. It's not in Numbers at all. It's in Exodus 34. She's actually preaching on this at St. Matt's on Sunday night. Just a trailer, yeah. You'll know the bit where Moses says to God, I want to see your glory. And that great moment where God says, you can't see it. Yeah, you can't see it face on. You're going to have to hide in the cleft of the rock and you'll see my back going past. And what does that glory look like? What is the glory of the presence of God? Well, Moses says in Exodus 33:18, now show me your glory. And the Lord said, I will cause all my goodness to pass in front of you, and I will proclaim my name, the Lord, in your presence. I will have mercy on whom I'll have mercy, and I'll have compassion on whom I'll have compassion. But you cannot see my face, for no one will see me and live. And then it skips on to Exodus 34, and it says, and he passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation. What does the glory of God look like? It's the goodness of God. It's the abounding love of God. It's the wonder of God. So when we want the glory to come, what we want is God's love to be manifest. It says in Isaiah 55 that God's ways are not our ways. His thoughts are above our thoughts, which normally in church we use when we don't understand what's going on. We go, oh, his thoughts are not our thoughts. The bit before us said that the wicked will be forgiven. It makes no sense because God's love makes no sense. Are we people who everything comes from the love of God? That we are broken on our knees and crying out for the lost and for the saved, who are the more annoying ones because they're in our churches? Are we people who love as God loves? Or do we go through the motions? What does love look like for us in the church today? I wonder, and maybe this is just me, the quiet revival. Am I excited by the miracles? Am I excited by the fact that young men and others are coming into church and God has moved them and motivated them, stirred something in them, and we get them coming at a point where we're worried the church is in decline, and it's a sign that God's on the move, Aslan's on the move. Am I excited by that, or am I excited by the young person in front of me? Am I excited by revival and praying for it? Because if I'm honest, what a gift that people come to church without us putting the effort in. That we don't have to go out and slave and try and find people and go to the hidden places. They're coming to us. And that's incredible and exciting. Rather than me praying on my face for the lost who aren't coming. For the one who's stirred by the yearning for God and doesn't know what to do with that brokenness and that yearning. Am I on my face before God in tears. Is my heart breaking for what breaks his? A couple of weeks ago, I was in Exeter. I have to go there occasionally. Actually, I have to go there more than I'm in Plymouth. And 10 years ago, I was talking to a police officer and said, we're doing stuff with youth in town. And he said, why don't you come out and see what we're doing? And I went, yeah, it's my childhood dream, going in a fast police car. And he's never got me to go. And then a couple of weeks ago, after 10 years, he said, why don't you come and come up to Exeter and come on a shift with me and see what we do? And I was kind of like, I'd rather do it in Plymouth now, if I'm honest. And I went. And the evening was really, a lot of it was about young people and about low-grade antisocial behavior. And I was like, wow, this takes me back. When I was working next to young people, there was a time when there were young people who were jumping on the back of buses in a pedestrianised area and riding on the back of a bus, and there'd be a PCSO that would chase them, and it'd be such fun for them because that was all they wanted, was the PCSO not able to catch up with them. She'd get to them, and then they'd scatter. And they'd leave the poor kid behind that didn't quite know what was going on or why they were there, and they're the one that would get caught. And I said it kind of jokingly, and he went, yeah. I could tell you about every single one of those young men. He's in prison. He's dealing drugs and name the place. He's abroad, involved in a crime gang. He's dead. And these were 13, 14-year-olds before. And that evening we were engaging with, well, we didn't actually engage with them. There were 13, 14-year-olds who'd been causing problems in Exeter, 10 of them, for weeks, and the police had been trying to work out what to do with them. That night they couldn't deal with them, because that night most of the shift had to go home early because they need to be in Exeter the next day for the protests. So what needed to happen that day didn't happen because of the protests. A few weeks before, I was in Plymouth for the protests, and the young man or older man who's there with his air horn, screaming and shouting at others and saying, get the immigrants out, and angry, and his anger's actually because he's working 2 jobs and he can't afford to feed his kids. And that's all he has to do in his life as a bloke, is provide, and he can't provide. And so he's failing his family. Or moving a bit further down through Plymouth, the prostitutes that Pop-Up Church works with. The prostitutes who are emaciated shells of human beings, whose bodies are broken and trashed, and yet for some reason some bloke is willing to pay money to have sex with one of them. And where's their hope? The foster woman that I was talking to the other day, who said that she had a woman she worked with who was a drug addict, and she kept contact with the mum and the child she had, and she said, I don't understand why your child is so scared of being in a room on their own. It's almost like, and particularly boxes. And mum said, well, that's because when I was dealing drugs to survive, when the dealer came to the house to sell me the drugs, I would shut him in a box because I didn't want anyone to go near him and hurt him. What is our love and our concern for those whose God's heart breaks over? The person in prison, who's in prison for the murder of his partner, their life was chaotic. There was mess, there was abuse. But he would say that day on the bridge, he was trying to stop her jumping, and yet he's in prison for pushing her. Do we want the church to not just wait for these people to come to us, but to be there for them? Do our hearts break for lives that are broken before they begin? Maybe, just maybe, if our hearts broke more for what breaks God's heart, we wouldn't be worried about whether the church down the road is stealing our people, apparently. About whether the leak in our roof of our church is worse than the leak of the roof down the road, but they've got hundreds of thousands to sort it. What is it that breaks God's heart? When was the last time I cried, let alone fell on my face in prayer? What is God saying to us as the leaders of churches in the Southwest? What would it look like if we cried out on our faces for the broken and the lost and the hopeless, and out of our love went to find them and to bring Jesus, who's already there, and pray that their lives would be transformed? What would our programs, our energies, our lives look like? Are we like Moses, praying and doing, but actually our hearts are not there? I was going to bring you a cheery message this morning, but I felt that's what I need to say. And it's the second time I've preached on that bit of Numbers, and I think God's trying to challenge me and break my heart. You just got to watch.